Welcome to our last lecture in social media law and risk management. It's Module 5, it's your second lecture, and we're looking at strategies for managing social media risk. This is vital as you work towards your critique of the social media policy and as you leave the course, because all of this law we've been learning adds to social media risk, and you need to work out how to manage that, particularly in a communication crisis context. Well, we had 3 readings last week, and this week there's just the one, and that is Minocha and Jarvi's article from Electronic Markets called Perceived Risks and Risk Management of Social Media in an Organisation Context. Now that sounds as if it's quite relevant to today, and I think it is, so let's look at what we're going to cover. Remember, there's no learning problem this module, we're just focused on your final assignment and how you'll do that best. We'll be looking at social media risk management, which uses the acronym SMRM, Social Media Risk Management, and exploring the key risk dimensions of social media. We'll examine how the perceived risks affect an organisation, and we'll use procedural control and proactive focusing to manage those risks. And then we'll have a few discussion questions as usual. So I repeat, no learning problem for Module 5. Well, what do Minocha and Jarvi say about social media risk in an organisational context? Well, they say a whole lot, and we can only really summarise it here today. It's interesting the Scandinavians have been doing all this work in the area, because last week we were looking at some Swedish studies of local government organisations, and this week it's the Finns. We're looking at Finnish research, survey research based around social media risk. What they do say is that organisational risks generally, and they do give quite a good background to the literature on risk analysis and organisational risk. They say organisational risks include time loss, psychological risks, financial, performance risks, and physical risks. So we're left asking, as they were, where social media fits into this. Well, the study, based on survey research, found that the main social media risks to an organisation were around loss, financial, and functional risks. So what did they mean by the time loss risk? Well, when we look at social media, it meant that the time used to plan and design communications in social media and the time used to monitor such communications. With financial risk, it was uncertainty about profitability resulting from the investment and unexpected costs stemming from the adoption and use of social media. And those of you involved in organisations using social media are fully aware of these unexpected costs that do arise. 24-hour moderation is something that you don't pay for lightly. And then there's the functional risk, the quality of marketing communication delivered through social media and the ability of the features of social media to perform the assigned tasks. So how well does social media actually carry out those tasks, particularly in marketing communications? You might want to consider yourself with this having had a good look at defamation in the course, where reputational risk and crisis aversion sit within that framework. And that's something you might like to discuss on the discussion board. Well, when we start to examine how perceived risks impact, the article provides some further guidance. They say that risks are often associated with the communication content, as we've learned from our many examples of poor practice and practice that has landed users in legal trouble through other weeks of this course. To quote from the authors, open communication that cannot be controlled is the main source of perceived risk in organisations, as communications about the organisation have the potential to be negative. So there we have it, don't we? There we have the potential reputational damage in that sentence, saying that communications about the organisation have the potential to be negative. Now, the authors aren't telling us anything greatly new here. In fact, we probably knew this before we signed up for the course. But nevertheless, it's interesting to see that the organisations they have surveyed have reinforced this view, that open communication is the difficulty in this command approach because it's so hard to control the open source nature of social media. What this forces organisations to do is invest resources in planning and managing the use of social media to reduce these so-called functional or performance risks. Maybe you're doing this course as part of your organisation's attempts to invest these extra resources in planning and managing your social media use. That could be one example. To quote them again, however, the investment of more resources leads to other forms of risk, financial and time loss. So if your management had invested in you doing this course, then it's clearly cost them something for you to do the course, and the time, your time off in lieu, if you're lucky enough to get that for doing the course, then that's a further time loss element that they've endured. So it's necessary to identify the type of risk perceived in the use of social media when we are doing this risk analysis. So you might also, in your social media policy analysis, start to look at the extent to which these perceived risks are being reflected in the policies that seem to be developed, the ones that you're critiquing. The graphic here, table 4 from the article, is it's probably not of a quality you can see on the video. You can actually see it when you go to the PowerPoint slide. But it gives further explanation of those 5 factors of risk that the authors introduced at the beginning of the article. The time loss risk, the financial risk, the functional risk, a proactive focus, and procedural control. And they have 2 or 3 points of explanation under each. So if you're struggling coming to terms with the meaning from what we've said so far, please access that slide on the actual PowerPoint slides themselves or within the article itself, and that might shed some light on it for you. On this area of procedural control and a proactive focus that an organisation needs to take when implementing social media, there is another very telling quote from the authors. What they say is, although procedural control and proactive focusing are somewhat effective at managing risk, other applications are needed. Knowledge, which prior studies have established is important in managing risk, was also seen as the key factor influencing the perceived risks of using social media. So it's not just a matter of having control over the procedures for the use of social media and being proactive and to some extent predictive of the misuse or risks that might arise, but it's also having the knowledge about social media, the knowledge about risk, the knowledge about policy development, which is crucial to an organisation getting on top of this exciting new area. And that's clearly what your course has been about, hasn't it? Giving you at least some tools to develop that knowledge and to learn how to implement them. So hopefully we've covered part of that base that the authors found as a very important step for organisations in this path. So I have a question for you here. Does this reinforce earlier readings that you've done on considering the needs of stakeholders and adopting an inclusive approach? So when you start thinking of procedural control, you're not so much thinking of stakeholders and their needs as much as trying to keep the lid on social media use. Proactive focusing is getting a little bit closer to the mark, I think, and you might be more proactive in considering the needs of stakeholders. And certainly acquiring knowledge is very important to that role, because the more knowledge you acquire about the social media stakeholders and the platforms themselves and the way they're used, the more you understand the risks that are involved, and so the more you can build that into your policy development. Well, we find this mapped quite well in this model that the authors have developed. And that sits in their article at page 226. It is the risk perception towards the adoption of social media flowchart or model. It builds in their hypotheses from their research article. They're not as crucial to us here. We're more concerned with what's in the boxes rather than their separate hypotheses. But the risk perception they list as those 4 areas: the time loss risk, the psychological risk, the financial risk, and the functional risk that is attached to social media. And this keys into the actual use of social media, you see on the right-hand side, and the methods for managing those risks, which might be proactive focusing and procedural control. So hopefully that also provides some tools for you to use. Well, what are our conclusions on risk analysis? What do we draw together from this? And I've bolded a few points in the slide here so that they really stand out for your better understanding. We need to concentrate especially on managing how personnel within an organisation perceive the time loss risk and how they can improve the time efficiency of planning, designing and monitoring marketing communication in social media. The authors don't talk that much about the time loss that might be involved in employees' personal use of social media during their work time. I think they're setting that aside from the overall organisational needs. But managing how they perceive the time loss risk is most effectively done by developing written procedures and policies that we're working on now for specific decision making in relation to the adoption and use of social media, and by investing in training personnel about social media. That's where the knowledge factor keys in. That's why you're sitting here doing the course now. That's why you're just about finished this course, because the training side of it, the knowledge side of it is crucial as an investment so that organisational staff understand the risks attached with social media and the way they can best manage those through effective social media policies. As well as doing this, we need to improve processes that help manage time loss. The adoption of social media can be enhanced by establishing processes that promote the organisation's proactive focus, such as setting clear objectives, planning for contingencies, and maintaining good relationships with stakeholders. What a great word to end on, hey? Stakeholders. So that proactive focus can be gained by setting clear objectives, planning for contingencies, and maintaining good relationships with stakeholders. And when we hark back to our early study of stakeholders in the course, and we learned how social identity might play an important role in identifying and dealing with stakeholders, we take that broader definition of who our constituency might be when we're developing social media policies, and how those policies might impact on not just the staff, not just the directors, not just the clients or consumers, but also other identity groups out there in the broader community. Well, what are our discussion questions for this final topic? To what extent do you agree with this approach to social media risk analysis? Are there tools you could add to it? How well does this study of Finnish organisations fit with your understanding of social media risk analysis in your country? And how might you improve the risk analysis approach that's been taken here? The students who do best in their final assignment won't just be mimicking what's been done here, they'll be adapting it to the particular context of the social media policy that they're examining. So it could be there are other tools you wish to build in. There will be tools that you might wish to reject from these various approaches that we've looked at over the past couple of weeks. But at least they present to you a model, examples of one approach in each case, and so you can pick from them, you can cherry pick what might be useful in your own social media analysis. Where have we been? We've looked at one approach to the analysis of social media risk in an organisation, and we've looked at this phenomenon of social media risk management, SMRM. We've drawn upon this academic study to identify the key risk dimensions of social media. We've examined how those perceived risks might affect an organisation. We've considered how organisations use procedural control and proactive focusing to manage social media risks. Where are we heading? Well, this is our final lecture, so it's important for you to try to build these tools into your final assignment if you find them useful. Alternatively, you can research and implement other approaches. Please use the discussion board during this vital final stage as you work up to your final written assignment. Go on there and talk about those discussion questions. Share some different approaches with your fellow students. All of that will really enrich your final assignment to maximise your marks, but more importantly, to benefit your organisation and future organisations through your better understanding of the role of social media policies, how to incorporate stakeholder needs, and how to develop better social media policies taking account of risk analysis in a communication crisis context. I hope you've enjoyed the course, and I look forward to seeing you perhaps in real life at some stage. Bye for now.